40 acres and a mule is a phrase every American has heard, but few truly understand the promise behind it or why it never became reality for millions of formerly enslaved people. What could have been one of the most transformative moments in U.S. history instead became one of the greatest broken promises, shaping centuries of inequality that followed. In this video, we're breaking down the real reason African Americans never received 40 acres and a mule, the politics, the backlash, the last-minute reversals, and the systemic forces that erased a promise that could have changed the economic future of Black America. This isn't just history, it's the origin of a wealth gap still felt today. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because understanding this moment is key to understanding America's unfinished story. The original promise was made during the war. In January 1965, Union General William Sherman issued Special Field Order No. 15. This order set aside 400,000 acres of land along the southeastern coast, stretching from Charleston, South Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. The land would be divided into 40-acre plots and given to freed Black families. The mule part came later, as Army officials provided surplus animals to help these families farm their new land. By June 1865, around 40,000 freed people had settled on this land and started building new communities. They planted crops, built homes, and began creating the economic foundation they had been denied under slavery. For the first time, these families had real hope of owning something and passing it down to their children. President Johnson reversed everything. When President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in April 1865, Vice President Andrew Johnson became president. Johnson was a Southern Democrat who never supported giving land to freed slaves. He believed the land should go back to the white plantation owners who had fought against the Union. By fall 1865, Johnson ordered that all confiscated Confederate land be returned to its previous owners if they took an oath of loyalty to the United States. This meant that the freed families who had just started farming were forced off the land they thought was theirs. Union soldiers had to physically remove Black families from the plots they had been working. The dream of land ownership disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared. Congress tried but failed to make it permanent. Some members of Congress fought to keep the land redistribution going. Representative Thaddeus Stevens proposed confiscating land from the largest Confederate plantations and distributing it to freed people. He argued that without economic resources, freedom would be meaningless. Senator Charles Sumner also pushed for land reform as part of Reconstruction, but these efforts never gained enough support. Most Northern politicians wanted to reunify the country quickly and didn't want to anger Southern whites by taking their land permanently. The Freedmen's Bureau, created to help formerly enslaved people, tried to negotiate labor contracts instead of providing land. These contracts often trapped Black workers in conditions similar to slavery. Economic interests won over justice. The broken promise wasn't just about racism, though that played a huge role. It was also about money and power. Southern plantation owners needed cheap labor to make their farms profitable again after the war. If freed Black people owned their own land, they wouldn't work for low wages on white-owned plantations. Northern textile manufacturers also wanted cheap Southern cotton to keep flowing to their factories. They needed the plantation system to continue, just without actual slavery. Land redistribution would have completely changed the Southern economy, and powerful business interests opposed this. Government chose to protect property rights of former Confederates over providing justice for formerly enslaved people. Alternative plans never worked out. Some proposals tried to find middle ground solutions. The Southern Homestead Act of 1866 opened up public land in Southern states for freed people to claim. But this land was often poor-quality swampland or forests that were hard to clear and farm. Freed families also lacked the tools, seeds, and capital needed to make these homesteads successful. Without the mules and equipment that were supposed to come with the original 40 acres, most attempts at homesteading failed. Some black communities did manage to purchase land and build successful towns, but these were exceptions. The vast majority of freed people ended up as sharecroppers, renting land from white owners and staying in poverty. The impact still affects black Americans today. The failure to provide 40 acres and a mule created a massive wealth gap that still exists. Land ownership is how most American families built wealth to pass down to their children. When black families were denied this opportunity, they started generations behind in accumulating assets. Sharecropping and Jim Crow laws kept most black Southerners poor for another 100 years. Even when black families did manage to buy land, they often lost it to theft, fraud, or forced sales. Studies showed that if freed people had received the promised land and kept it, their descendants today would have significantly more wealth. The broken promise didn't just affect one generation, it affected every generation that came after. Legal and political barriers were deliberately created. After Reconstruction ended in 1877, Southern states passed laws specifically designed to keep black people from owning property. Poll taxes and literacy tests prevented black citizens from voting for politicians who might support land reform. Convict leasing systems arrested black men on minor charges and forced them into labor, preventing them from saving money to buy land. Restrictive covenants and redlining later prevented black families from buying property in many areas. When black communities did succeed in building wealth, like in Tulsa's Greenwood district, white mobs sometimes destroyed them with violence. The system wasn't just passively unfair, it actively worked to prevent black economic advancement at every turn. Modern calls for reparations connect to this history. Today, discussions about reparations for slavery often reference the 40 acres and a mule as a starting point. This wasn't simply a symbolic gesture that never materialized, it was an official promise made by the U.S. government to formerly enslaved people during Reconstruction. However, this promise was deliberately and systematically broken, leaving many free black families without the means to build economic stability after emancipation. Because of this, many historians and activists argue that the United States owes a debt to the descendants of enslaved people, because the government's failure directly contributed to the persistent racial wealth gap. Proposals for reparations vary widely. Some suggest calculating what 40 acres of land, with its accumulated value and interest over time, would be worth today. Others focus on modern programs aimed at closing economic disparities through education, housing initiatives, and support for black-owned businesses.